Bianca Foley walked into that courtroom like she owned it, head-high heels clicking on marble, Catherine's stolen sapphire blazing at her throat like a trophy. She smiled at the plaintiff's table. She actually smiled. And Catherine Brooke, 42 years old, 12 years of marriage behind her hands, folded over a leather notebook, looked up and went completely still. If you've ever watched someone walk straight into their own destruction without knowing it, stay with me. Drop your city in the comments so I can see how far this story has traveled. And if you're new here, subscribe because you do not want to miss a single second of what happens next. The morning of the hearing, Catherine Brooke woke up before her alarm. She lay in the guest room of her sister Carol's house on the north side of Chicago, staring at the ceiling, listening to the radiator knock and hiss the way it always did in February. Outside, the sky was the color of old pewter, the kind of cold that gets into your teeth. She didn't feel nervous. That surprised her. She had expected to feel something catastrophic when she opened her eyes, the chest-tightening dread that had been her constant companion for the last 8 months. But instead, she felt something closer to clarity, the kind of calm that comes not from peace, but from absolute decision. She had already decided. Everything that happened today was just the world catching up. She showered, dressed in the navy wool suit Carol had helped her pick out 3 weeks ago, and sat at the kitchen table with a cup of black coffee she didn't drink. Carol came downstairs at 6:15 in her bathrobe, took one look at Catherine's face, and didn't say anything. She just put a hand on her sister's shoulder and squeezed. "Rebecca called last night," Catherine said. "I know, she called me too." Carol sat down across from her. "She said you're ready." "She said the case is ready." "Same thing." Catherine shook her head slowly. "No, it's not. But I'll get through it." Carol watched her for a moment. "You're going to walk out of that building today with everything, Katie, everything he tried to take." Catherine picked up her coffee cup, set it back down without drinking. "I just want what's mine. That's all I've ever wanted." She meant the necklace. She meant her name. She meant the 12 years she had given to a man who had apparently been calculating her destruction for at least 3 of them. Rebecca Stiles met her on the courthouse steps at 8:45. Rebecca was 49 tall with close-cropped silver hair and the kind of posture that made judges sit up straighter when she walked into a room. She had been recommended to Catherine by a friend of a friend who had gone through a similarly ugly divorce 2 years earlier, and the first thing Rebecca had said to Catherine in their initial consultation was, "Tell me everything, and don't protect him while you do it." Catherine had liked her immediately. "How are you feeling?" Rebecca asked, falling into step beside her. "Fine." "Good. Keep feeling fine. Don't feel anything else until I tell you to." Rebecca. "I'm serious, Catherine. Today is not the day for feelings. Today is the day for watching. Can you do that?" "Yes. Whatever happens in that room, whatever he says, whatever his attorney says, whatever anyone in the gallery does or says or wears, you fold your hands on that table and you look at the judge. Not at Jonathan, not at anyone else, just the judge." "I understand." Rebecca stopped walking and turned to face her. "I need you to really understand, because I know things today that you don't know yet, and some of it is going to be hard to look at." Catherine felt the first flutter of something in her chest. What things? Things that prove everything we've been saying. Things that are going to change the outcome of this case beyond what you're expecting. Rebecca paused. "But I need your composure to hold, because the moment you react, really react, visibly, emotionally, you give Jonathan's attorney something to work with. You give the judge a reason to look at you instead of at him. Can you hold it?" Catherine thought about the necklace. She thought about her grandmother's hands, papery and warm, fastening the clasp at the back of her neck when she was 8 years old. She thought about standing in her own kitchen 8 months ago, coming home from her mother's hospital room, stepping through her front door, and knowing immediately, viscerally, before she even saw the empty jewelry box, that something had been taken from her. "I can hold it," she said. They walked into the building. The courtroom was smaller than Catherine had imagined. She had never been inside a family court before, not like this, not as a principal. The ceiling was lower than she expected, the fluorescent light flat and institutional, the benches along the walls already filling with people she didn't recognize. Legal staff clerks, a few members of the public who followed these kinds of high-profile divorce proceedings the way other people followed sports. She sat down at the plaintiff's table and opened her leather notebook to a blank page. She uncapped a pen. She didn't know what she intended to write. She just needed her hands to have something to do. Jonathan was already there. He sat at the defendant's table across the room with his attorney Richard Falk, a compact man in an expensive gray suit who had the manner of someone who had spent 30 years learning how to make facts sound like opinions and opinions sound like facts. Jonathan himself looked the same as he always had, broad-shouldered, silver-haired at the temples, the kind of handsome that photographs well and holds up under pressure. He was 51 years old, and he had been lying to Catherine for so long and so fluently that she sometimes wondered if he even knew the difference anymore between what was true and what was convenient. He didn't look at her when she sat down. That had always been his tell. Jonathan Brooke, who could look a business partner in the eye while renegotiating a deal that would cost them everything, could not look at Catherine when he knew he had done something unforgivable. It was the one involuntary thing about him. She had learned it in year 3 of their marriage, and she had never forgotten it. He was looking at his hands. Rebecca set her briefcase on the table and laid out her documents with the precision of someone who had done this 10,000 times. She leaned close to Catherine and said quietly, "When the doors open in a few minutes, don't turn around." Catherine frowned. "Why?" "Because I need you to be looking at the judge when it happens. Whatever you feel, I need it going toward that bench, not toward the back of the room." "What's going to happen?" Rebecca straightened her papers. "Just trust me." The bailiff called the room to order. Judge Samuel Peterson entered 63, gray-bearded, with the measured movements of a man who had heard every variation of human dishonesty and had long since stopped being surprised by any of it. He settled into his chair, reviewed something on the desk in front of him, and looked out at the room with the patient attention of a man who intended to do his job thoroughly. "We're here today in the matter of Brooke versus Brooke," he said. "This is a hearing regarding the dissolution of marriage with ancillary matters, including disputed property, alleged fraudulent concealment of assets, and a formal complaint filed with this court regarding the theft and insurance fraud surrounding items of personal property belonging to the plaintiff." He paused. "Is counsel prepared?" "Plaintiff's counsel is prepared, Your Honor," Rebecca said, rising briefly. "Defense is prepared," said Richard Falk with the smoothness of someone who had been prepared for a long time. "Very well. We'll begin with—" The courtroom doors opened. Catherine did not turn around. She had promised Rebecca she wouldn't, and she kept that promise, but she felt it. She felt the change in the room, the way you feel a drop in temperature, not a sound exactly, but a shift in attention, a collective intake of breath that moved through the gallery like a wave. She heard heels on the floor. She heard the deliberate, unhurried rhythm of someone who wanted to be heard walking. She kept her eyes on Judge Peterson. She saw his eyes move. She saw them track across the room toward the back, take something in, and then return to the bench with the practiced neutrality of a man who had learned not to react to theatrics. But she caught at the half-second pause, the fractional tightening around his eyes. She heard Jonathan's chair shift. She heard Richard Falk say something very quietly close to Jonathan's ear. She couldn't make out the words, but the tone was unmistakable. It was the tone of an attorney recalibrating. And then she heard Rebecca right beside her exhale slowly through her nose. Not surprise. Something else. Something closer to satisfaction. "Ms. Stiles." Judge Peterson said, his voice even, "You mentioned ancillary matters in your pre-hearing brief relating to the alleged personal property. You've listed a witness." "Yes, Your Honor, we have a witness we intend to call at the appropriate time." "That will come after opening statements. Counselors, proceed." Catherine allowed herself one breath, one controlled, quiet breath, and then she folded her hands on the notebook and she listened. Richard Falk went first. He was good, she had to give him that. He was very good. He built Jonathan's story the way a skilled contractor builds a wall brick by careful brick, each piece fitting snugly against the next. Jonathan Brooke, devoted husband. Jonathan Brooke, successful businessman, whose success had come with the inevitable stresses that sometimes damage even loving marriages. Jonathan Brooke, a man who had come home one evening to find the house disturbed, his wife away visiting her mother. No sign of forced entry, because as any honest security expert would tell you, modern burglars are sophisticated. Catherine had been warned repeatedly about the security system's vulnerabilities, and his client could not be held responsible for his wife's carelessness with irreplaceable property. The word carelessness landed in Catherine's chest like a stone dropped into still water. She kept her hands folded. She kept her eyes on the judge. Falk continued. Jonathan had cooperated fully with the insurance investigation. He had provided every document requested. He had been forthcoming in every way. The insurance payout, which Ms. Stiles' team seemed to find suspicious, had been handled entirely by the insurer's own protocols, and any suggestion that Mr. Brooke had directed or influenced the disposition of those funds was frankly defamatory and would be demonstrated as such. Jonathan, during all of this, sat with his hands flat on the table and his eyes forward. He looked like a man who was holding very still by choice, not by necessity. Catherine knew that look. She had seen it across dinner tables, across bedrooms, across years. Then Rebecca stood up. She didn't raise her voice. She never did. That was one of the things Catherine had come to understand about Rebecca Stiles in the months they had worked together. The quieter her voice, the more dangerous she was. Your Honor, Rebecca began, the defense has just described my client's grandmother's sapphire necklace, a piece valued at over $400,000 and irreplaceable in sentimental terms, as the product of her own carelessness. A pause. We will demonstrate that this necklace was not lost to carelessness. We will demonstrate that it was taken deliberately as part of a coordinated scheme involving insurance fraud, asset concealment, and grand larceny. We will show this court exactly where the insurance payout went, exactly how it got there, and exactly who benefited from it. Another pause, and then we will show the court where the necklace went. She sat down. Jonathan's jaw moved. Richard Falk leaned toward him, and Catherine watched from the corner of her eye the barely perceptible shake of Jonathan's head. The tiniest motion, the kind of motion that means, not now, I'll handle it, stay still. Judge Peterson called for Jonathan to take the stand. Jonathan straightened his jacket, stood cross to the witness chair, and was sworn in with the unhurried manner of a man who had testified in business proceedings before and knew the mechanics of a courtroom. He settled into the chair and looked out at the room with the expression Catherine had seen him use at 100 business dinners, open, frank, just slightly warm. The expression of a man who had nothing to hide because a man with nothing to hide wouldn't bother hiding anything. Richard Falk led him through his testimony. Jonathan spoke about the marriage with what Catherine recognized as genuine feeling, not for her, she understood now, but for the version of the marriage that had served him. He spoke about the distance that had grown between them. He spoke carefully and just briefly enough about fundamental incompatibilities. He spoke about the evening of the burglary, coming home, finding the door unlocked, calling the police, the shock of discovering the jewelry box empty. Were you aware, Falk asked, that your wife had concerns about the security system? I'd raised it with her several times, Jonathan said. He sounded regretful. The system was old. I wanted to upgrade it. Catherine preferred to leave things as they were. She's a private person. She didn't like the idea of cameras inside the house. And the insurance claim, I filed it as soon as the police report was complete. The insurer handled everything from there. I had no involvement in how the payout was structured. Were you aware of any offshore accounts connected to the payout? Absolutely not. The words were clean flat and delivered without hesitation. Catherine wrote one word in her notebook, absolutely. She underlined it once. Then Rebecca stood up. Mr. Brooke, she said, approaching the witness stand with a folder in her hand. You've testified that you had no involvement in how the insurance payout was structured. Is that correct? That's correct. And you've testified that you were unaware of any offshore accounts connected to the payout. Yes. Rebecca opened the folder. She removed a single sheet of paper and set it on the railing in front of him. Can you tell the court what this is? Jonathan looked at it. Something moved behind his eyes so fast that if Catherine had blinked, she would have missed it. It appears to be a financial document. It appears to be, Rebecca agreed pleasantly. Can you read the account name listed at the top? A pause. Meridian Holdings, LLC. And can you tell the court who owns Meridian Holdings, LLC? Falk was on his feet. Objection, Your Honor. Foundation. I'll connect it, Your Honor, Rebecca said. Proceed carefully, Ms. Stiles. Mr. Brooke, are you familiar with Meridian Holdings, LLC? Another pause, slightly longer. I'm familiar with a number of holding companies in my portfolio. That's not what I asked. Are you familiar with this specific entity, Meridian Holdings, LLC, incorporated in the Cayman Islands in March of last year? Jonathan looked at Falk. Falk's expression didn't change. Jonathan looked back at Rebecca. I'd need to consult my records. Of course, Rebecca said, in a tone that suggested she had expected exactly that answer. She withdrew the document. We'll return to that. She paused. Mr. Brooke, on the evening of the alleged burglary, you testified that you came home and found the door unlocked. Your wife was visiting her mother at Northwestern Memorial. Is that right? Yes. How did you know she was at Northwestern Memorial? She'd told me she was going. Had she told you when she was going? She mentioned she might go that week. That week, Rebecca repeated. Not that evening specifically. She may have said the evening. I don't recall precisely. You don't recall precisely. Rebecca turned to the bench. Your Honor, I'd like to introduce into evidence a record of text messages between the plaintiff and the defendant recovered from the plaintiff's phone dated the evening of the burglary. Falk objected, was overruled. The messages were entered. Rebecca read them aloud. Jonathan had texted Catherine at 2 p.m. Is your mom okay? You going to the hospital tonight? Catherine had replied, Yes, going after dinner. Probably be there until 9 or 10. Rebecca set the transcript down. So you did know she would be out that evening, Mr. Brooke. You knew the precise window. Jonathan's hands flat on the railing of the witness stand pressed down slightly. I knew she was going to the hospital. That doesn't mean anything. It means you knew when the house would be empty. Objection. Falk again. Withdrawn, Rebecca said serenely. No further questions at this time. Jonathan returned to his seat. He moved carefully the way a person moves when they're concentrating very hard on appearing to move normally. Catherine watched him sit down. She watched him pick up his pen. She watched him set it down again. She thought about the evening of the burglary. She thought about sitting at her mother's bedside in that hospital room, her mother's hand in hers, the machines beeping softly, the smell of antiseptic and cut flowers. She thought about her phone buzzing with Jonathan's text. How's she doing? Thinking of you both. She had thought in that moment that it was kind of him to check in. She had thought briefly that maybe they could find their way through. She picked up her pen. She wrote one more word in the notebook. Beneath absolutely, she wrote window. And then Judge Peterson said, Ms. Stiles, you indicated you have a witness. Yes, Your Honor. At this time, the plaintiff calls Oliver Trent. The room shifted. Catherine felt it before she understood it, a new quality of tension, different from what had been there before, the way the air changes before a storm breaks. She heard from somewhere behind her, and to the right, a sound. Not a word, not quite a gasp. Something involuntary and quickly suppressed. She kept her eyes on the judge. Rebecca passed the table, leaned down briefly, and said in Catherine's ear, Hold it. And then she heard the door at the side of the courtroom open and footsteps approaching the stand, and the room went very, very quiet. Catherine did not turn around. She didn't look at Bianca Foley, who had walked into that courtroom 40 minutes ago with Catherine's grandmother's sapphire blazing at her throat like something she had earned. She didn't look at Jonathan, who had gone completely still in a way that had nothing to do with composure, and everything to do with a man who has just understood in the span of a single breath that the ground beneath him is gone. She looked at Judge Peterson. She kept her hands flat and still on the notebook, and she waited, because Catherine Brooke had learned in 12 years of marriage to a man who dealt in leverage and timing that the most powerful moment in any confrontation is not the one where you strike. It's the one where the other person realizes too late that they never should have started. Oliver Trent settled into the witness chair, and Bianca Foley, sitting in the gallery in her carefully chosen dress with Catherine's stolen sapphire around her neck, made a sound that Catherine heard clearly from across the room. Not a word, just a sound, small and sharp and completely involuntary. The kind of sound a person makes when a door they didn't know existed swings open in front of them, and they see for the first time exactly where they are standing. Catherine pressed the tip of her pen to the blank page of her notebook. She did not write anything. She just held it there steady and let the room do what the room was about to do. Oliver Trent was not a large man. That was the first thing people noticed, and usually the last thing they remembered about him, because everything else about him overrode the physical impression within about 30 seconds of watching him work. He was 54, lean, with the kind of face that forgot itself, the face of a man who had spent 20 years being professionally unremarkable. He walked to the witness stand with the unhurried confidence of someone who had sat in that chair before and knew exactly how much damage a calm voice could do in a quiet room. He was sworn in, he sat, he folded his hands in his lap. Rebecca approached him the way she approached everything, without rushing, without theater, with the quiet certainty of a woman who already knew every answer before she asked the question. "Mr. Trent," she said, "can you describe for the court your professional background?" 22 years as a licensed private investigator in the state of Illinois, Oliver said. His voice was even almost flat. The voice of a man reporting facts. Prior to that, 8 years with the Chicago Police Department Financial Crimes Division. And in your current capacity, were you retained by the plaintiff in this matter? I was retained by plaintiff's counsel approximately 7 months ago. Yes. Can you describe the nature of that engagement? Oliver looked at the judge, then back at Rebecca. I was asked to conduct a covert investigation into the circumstances surrounding the theft of personal property belonging to Mrs. Brooke and the subsequent insurance claim filed by her husband. And in the course of that investigation, did you make contact with the individual known as Bianca Foley? The room tightened. Catherine felt it physically, not a sound but a pressure, the way a room full of people holding their breath changes the quality of the air. I did, Oliver said. Can you describe how that contact was established? Oliver shifted slightly in his chair, not from discomfort, from the precision of a man organizing a long answer. Bianca Foley was identified early in the investigation as a person of interest due to her relationship with the defendant. Surveillance established that she had been in contact with Mr. Brooke during the period immediately preceding and following the theft. I created a cover identity, a tech investor based out of San Francisco named Daniel Harwick, and made contact with Miss Foley through a mutual social connection approximately 5 months ago. From somewhere behind, Catherine, she heard a sharp intake of breath. She didn't turn around. And what was the nature of your interactions with Ms. Foley under this cover identity? Over approximately 4 months, I cultivated a friendship with Ms. Foley. We met for lunch 6 times, dinner twice, and communicated regularly by text and phone. During this period, Ms. Foley disclosed a significant amount of information about her relationship with Mr. Brooke and about her own financial situation. Rebecca turned briefly toward the gallery, not looking at anyone specifically, but giving the room a moment to absorb what had just been said. Then she turned back. Mr. Trent, during these conversations, did Miss Foley make any statements regarding the jewelry belonging to Catherine Brooke? Richard Falk was on his feet before Oliver could answer. Objection, Your Honor. Hearsay. Your Honor, Rebecca said smoothly. The statements are being offered not for the truth of the matter asserted, but to establish the declarant's state of knowledge and participation in the alleged scheme. Judge Peterson considered for exactly 2 seconds. I'll allow it. Witness may answer. Oliver nodded. Yes. On 3 separate occasions, Ms. Foley referenced the jewelry. The first time was approximately 4 months ago during a lunch at a restaurant in River North. She described receiving what she called a gift from Jonathan, a necklace that she said was, and I'm quoting here, worth more than most people make in 5 years. She seemed proud of it. She described it as a salon sapphire 20 carats set in platinum. The courtroom was so quiet that Catherine could hear the pen of the court reporter moving. Did she describe how Mr. Brooke came to possess this necklace? She said Jonathan had told her he'd bought it specially for her. She repeated that several times over the course of our conversations, that it had been purchased for her. Did you believe that account? Objection. Falk again. Calls for speculation. Sustained. Judge Peterson looked at Rebecca. Rephrase. Based on your investigation, Mr. Trent, were you able to verify whether the necklace had been purchased or obtained by other means? Yes. We obtained the police report from the night of the alleged burglary, the original insurance appraisal for the necklace filed by Catherine Brooke 3 years prior, and a gemological certification from the Gemological Institute of America. The necklace described by Ms. Foley in terms of carat weight origin and setting matched the stolen item on all documented points. Falk stood. Your Honor, the defense would like to note that visual similarity does not establish— Counselor, Judge Peterson said, without raising his voice, you'll have your opportunity on cross. Please sit down. Falk sat. Rebecca waited a beat. Then, Mr. Trent, you mentioned 3 occasions on which Ms. Foley referenced the jewelry. You've described the first. What was the second? Oliver's eyes moved briefly toward the gallery the first time he had looked anywhere but at Rebecca or the judge. Then back. The second conversation took place approximately 6 weeks after the first. Ms. Foley contacted me. I should say she contacted Daniel Harwick and asked to meet privately. She said she needed advice from someone outside her immediate circle. We met at a coffee shop in Lincoln Park. What was the nature of her concern? She was frightened, Oliver said. And for the first time something in his voice changed. Not much, but enough. A fractional softening. The difference between reporting and witnessing. She had begun to understand, she said, that some of what Jonathan had told her wasn't entirely accurate. She didn't use the word lies. She said not entirely accurate. She was careful with language, but she was frightened. Frightened of what specifically? Of being implicated. She had begun to piece together that the necklace might not have been purchased the way Jonathan had told her. She had seen a news item, a brief local piece about the insurance investigation. She didn't connect it directly to herself at first, but it had unsettled her. She asked Daniel Harwick whether I thought a person could be held legally responsible for possessing something they didn't know was stolen. The gallery murmured. Judge Peterson let it run for 3 seconds, then order. Catherine wrote 2 words in her notebook. She pressed hard enough that the pen left marks on the page below. And what did you tell her? Rebecca asked. I told her it depended on how the possession was established and whether she had taken any active steps to conceal or transfer the property. Oliver paused. She went very quiet after that. Did she say anything else at that meeting? She said she was going to handle it. She said Jonathan had promised to take care of everything and she was going to trust him. Another pause. She seemed to be trying to convince herself. Rebecca let that sit in the room for a moment, then she moved. She walked back to the plaintiff's table, picked up a folder, and returned to the witness stand. Mr. Trent, you mentioned a 3rd conversation. Yes. When did that conversation take place? 11 days ago. The room reacted. Not loudly, not the kind of reaction you see in movies with gasps and exclamations. It was subtler than that. It was the sound of 20 people shifting in their seats at the same moment. 11 days ago, Rebecca repeated. And what was the nature of that conversation? Ms. Foley contacted Harwick in some distress. She had been told by Jonathan that the divorce proceedings were becoming complicated and that he needed her to hold certain items until after the settlement. He had used that specific phrase, hold certain items. She asked me what I thought that meant legally. And did she describe what items she was being asked to hold? She said Jonathan had asked her to wear the necklace publicly. Those were the words she used. Wear it publicly. He had told her that if the necklace was being openly worn by a private individual who claimed it was a gift, it would complicate any effort to reclaim it as marital property. Rebecca turned to face the courtroom. She let the silence sit there long enough to mean something, then turned back. So, to be clear, according to Ms. Foley's own statements to you, Mr. Brooke instructed her to wear the necklace publicly as a legal strategy during these proceedings. That is what she told me, yes. And today, Ms. Foley entered this courtroom wearing that necklace. She did, as Mr. Brooke instructed. Objection. Falk's voice was tight for the first time, argumentative. Withdrawn, Rebecca said. She turned to Judge Peterson. No further questions at this time, Your Honor. Jonathan put his hand over his mouth. It was a gesture he probably thought looked like thoughtfulness. Catherine knew better. She had seen that gesture at the kitchen table when a business deal had gone sideways. It was the gesture of a man trying to keep words inside. Falk stood for cross-examination. He was composed, she had to grant him that. He approached the witness stand with his jacket buttoned and his notes in hand, and he began, methodically, the way a surgeon begins an operation, focused, deliberate, looking for the right place to cut. Mr. Trent, you've described a covert operation in which you misrepresented your identity to Ms. Foley over a period of 4 months. Is that accurate? It is. You lied to her. I maintained a cover identity. Yes. You cultivated a friendship under false pretenses. That's one way to describe an undercover investigation. Yes. During these 4 months of deception, Falk said, his voice sharpening slightly on the word, Ms. Foley trusted you. She confided in you. She came to you with her fears. She did. And everything she told you, she told to a person who didn't exist. Oliver looked at him with the patience of a man who has heard this argument before and found it unpersuasive. She told it to a person who was listening very carefully and documenting everything accurately. The identity was false. The documentation is not. Falk didn't react. Mr. Trent, isn't it possible that Ms. Foley, speaking to what she believed was a trusted friend, was exaggerating, catastrophizing, perhaps even fabricating drama the way people sometimes do when they want to appear interesting to someone they're trying to impress? It's possible, Oliver said, which is why I didn't rely solely on her statements. Falk paused, half a beat, enough for Catherine to notice. Meaning what? Meaning the conversations with Ms. Foley were corroborated by independent financial evidence obtained separately. The statements were not the foundation of the investigation. They were confirmation of what the financial records had already established. What financial records? Oliver looked at Rebecca. Rebecca stood. Your Honor, plaintiff moves to introduce Exhibit 14, a certified forensic accounting report prepared by Cornerstone Financial Investigations detailing the movement of funds from the Brook Homeowners Insurance Payout through 3 intermediary entities to Meridian Holdings, LLC, a Cayman Islands corporation. Judge Peterson looked at Falk. Counselor. Falk was looking at the folder Rebecca was holding. He was looking at it the way a person looks at a door they know they can't unlock. Defense requests time to review the exhibit before. The defense received a copy of this report 14 days ago as part of standard discovery, Your Honor, Rebecca said. The judge looked at Falk. Falk said nothing. Peterson turned back. The exhibit is admitted. Mr. Trent, you were saying. Oliver looked at Falk with something that wasn't quite sympathy and wasn't quite satisfaction. It was the expression of a man who had watched this moment coming for 7 months and felt nothing about its arrival, except the mild relief of being right. The insurance payout of $380,000 was deposited in the joint Brook account on March 14th of last year. It was transferred in 4 separate transactions over the following 9 days to an LLC in Delaware Westport Consulting Group, which had been incorporated 11 days before the insurance claim was filed. From Westport Consulting, the funds moved to a second entity in the Channel Islands, and from there to Meridian Holdings in the Cayman Islands. And who controls Meridian Holdings? The registered agent is a law firm in Nassau, but the beneficial owner, as identified in the forensic report, is Jonathan Brooke. The gallery did not murmur this time. It went completely silent. The particular silence of a room full of people who have just heard something so clean and so complete that there is nothing to add to it. Jonathan's hand came off the table. He leaned toward Falk and said something low and fast. Falk did not look at him. Falk was looking at the judge, and the judge was looking at the forensic report that had just been entered into evidence, and the judge's face had the quality of a man who has stopped pretending to be neutral because neutrality is no longer what the moment requires. Ms. Stiles, Peterson said, setting down the report, does the plaintiff have additional evidence to present at this time? Yes, Your Honor. We have one additional item we'd like the court to consider. She reached under the plaintiff's table and brought out a velvet bag, a dark navy bag drawstring pulled tight. She carried it to the clerk's table and placed it on the evidence tray. She pulled the drawstring open. Diamonds caught the fluorescent light first, a spray of white fire that seemed impossible in the flat, institutional brightness of the room. Then emerald's deep green set in gold. A brooch Cartier, the kind that didn't need a label because the craftsmanship announced itself. And beneath all of it separate, wrapped in a square of white cloth, a pendant, Platinum setting, 20 carats, the color of a deep ocean on a clear day. Catherine's throat closed. She had not expected to see it like this. She had known it was coming. Rebecca had told her 2 weeks ago that the secondary items had been recovered. But knowing and seeing were different. The way knowing your mother is in the hospital is different from standing at her bedside at 2 in the morning. She pressed her pen against the notebook until the tip left a dent. She did not cry. She had decided months ago that she would not cry in this room. Not for him. Not because of anything he had done. She would not give him the image of her undone. She refused. But her hands, she felt her hands under the table where no one could see, where only she knew her hands were shaking. Judge Peterson looked at the evidence tray for a long moment. Then he looked at Jonathan Brooke. Jonathan was sitting very still, both hands flat on the table again, and he was looking at the necklace the way a person looks at something they have already lost and are only now accepting that they have lost it. "Mr. Falk," the judge said, "does the defense have any response to the evidence entered in the last 20 minutes? Falk stood. He straightened his jacket. He said, "The defense would like to request a brief recess to consult with our client, Your Honor." "I'll bet it would," Peterson said. It was not the kind of thing judges usually said. It was the kind of thing a man says when he has been patient for a long time and the patience has served its purpose and is no longer required. The gallery reacted, not loudly, but genuinely. Rebecca sat back down beside Catherine. She leaned close. "You okay?" "I'm fine," Catherine said. "Your hands are shaking." "I know. That's okay. Just keep them under the table." Catherine nodded. She looked at the evidence tray, at the pendant lying on its square of white cloth catching the light, the same way it had caught the light at her grandmother's vanity 40 years ago, the same way it had caught the light the morning Catherine had last worn it 3 years before. Any of this before she had any reason to imagine that the man across the breakfast table was already planning how to take it from her. "Rebecca," she said quietly. "Yes." "Does he know it's over?" Rebecca looked across the room at Jonathan Brooke, who was bent close to Richard Falk's ear, and at Richard Falk, who was not writing anything down, which meant there was nothing left to strategize, which meant he was listening because listening was all he had. "He knows," Rebecca said. "He's known since Oliver said Meridian Holdings." Catherine looked back at her notebook. The 2 words she had pressed into the page. She read them back to herself. She didn't say them out loud, but she felt them. And across the room in the gallery, Bianca Foley sat with one hand pressed flat against the sapphire at her throat, the way a person holds something they know is about to be taken, and her eyes, when Catherine finally allowed herself to look, were not smug anymore. They were the eyes of someone who had just understood too late and too completely that the man who had handed her this necklace had handed her something else along with it. He had handed her the weight of what he had done, and she was the one who had walked into the courtroom wearing it. Judge Peterson granted the recess, 10 minutes. The moment the gavel came down, the courtroom exhaled. People shifted, stretched, turned to each other with the suppressed energy of an audience between acts of something they hadn't expected to be this good. The clerk began organizing the evidence tray. The court reporter flexed her fingers. 2 of the gallery spectators were already typing on their phones. Richard Falk pulled Jonathan into the narrow hallway just outside the courtroom doors. Catherine watched them go. She watched the set of Jonathan's shoulders still controlled, still projecting the posture of a man who had options, and she recognized it for what it was. Performance. The last performance of a man whose audience had stopped believing him. Rebecca sat beside her and opened a bottle of water she produced from her briefcase. "Drink something." "I'm fine." "You're not fine. You're running on cortisol and 12 years of stored anger. Drink the water." Catherine drank. It was cold and it grounded her more than she expected. She set the bottle down and looked at the evidence tray where the necklace lay waiting patient, indifferent to everything that had been done in its name. "What happens in the second half?" Catherine asked. "Catherine, we finish what we started," Rebecca said. "Falk is going to come back in there and try one more move. He's going to try to reframe Bianca as a victim, an unwitting participant who received stolen property without knowledge. He'll try to separate her liability from Jonathan's." "Can he do that?" "He can try. But Oliver's testimony already closed that door. She knew. She may not have known everything, but she knew enough, and she said enough, and Oliver documented enough. Rebecca capped her own water bottle. The question now isn't whether Jonathan loses. He's already lost. The question is how much. Catherine looked across the empty courtroom at the defendant's table, at Jonathan's empty chair, at the legal pads covered in Richard Falk's handwriting, the coffee cup with the lid slightly askew, the personal artifacts of a man who had come into this room expecting to walk out intact. He really thought he was going to win, she said. It wasn't a question. Yes, Rebecca said simply. Men like Jonathan always think they're going to win. They've won enough times that they confuse track record with destiny. Catherine set her pen down on the notebook. When I found the jewelry box empty when I came home from the hospital that night, and the box was open and everything was gone, my first thought wasn't that he had taken it. I want you to know that. My first thought was that someone had broken in. I believed him. I know. For 3 weeks I believed him. I sat across from him at breakfast, and I thought we had both been robbed. I felt sorry for him. She paused. He brought me coffee. He sat with me while I cried about my grandmother's necklace. He held my hand. Rebecca didn't say anything for a moment. Then, that's going to matter to the judge. Not his testimony, just the nature of what was done matters. Peterson is not a man who misses those details. The hallway door opened. Jonathan and Falk came back in. Jonathan's face had rearranged itself into something approaching calm, but it was the arranged calm of a man who has been coached, not the natural calm of a man who has found his footing. He sat. He did not look at Catherine. Falk sat beside him and spread his notes on the table. He was already writing something new. Catherine watched his hand moving and thought, whatever he's writing, it isn't enough. She knew that the way she knew her own heartbeat. The bailiff called the room to order. Judge Peterson returned settled and looked at both tables with the even attention of a man who had processed the recess information and was ready to proceed. Before we continue, Peterson said, I want to note for the record that the evidence entered this morning, specifically Exhibit 14, and the recovered property in Exhibit 15, raises questions that extend beyond the civil dissolution proceeding currently before this court. I will be addressing those questions before we conclude today's session. He paused. Ms. Stiles, you may continue. Rebecca stood. Thank you, Your Honor. The plaintiff calls Bianca Foley. The room did not make a sound. From the gallery, after a beat of absolute stillness, came the sound of movement. The sound of someone who did not want to stand being compelled to stand anyway. Catherine heard heels on the floor, the same heels she had heard that morning when Bianca had walked in. The same rhythm, but different now. Heavier. Catherine looked. She let herself look for the first time since that morning. Bianca Foley walked to the witness stand, the way a person walks when every step is an act of conscious control. She was beautiful. Catherine had always known that, had known it since the first photograph she'd found on Jonathan's second phone 14 months ago. She was 28 years old, dark-haired, with the kind of composure that came from being looked at her entire life and learning to use it. But the composure was cracking at the edges now, the way expensive paint cracks when the surface beneath it shifts. Her jaw was set. Her hands, as she was sworn in, were not entirely steady. She sat. She looked at Catherine for exactly 1 second. Then she looked away. Rebecca approached without hurry. Ms. Foley, how long have you been in a relationship with Jonathan Brooke? Approximately 2 years, Bianca said. Her voice was controlled, deliberate. And during that time, did Mr. Brooke make you aware that he was married? A pause. He told me the marriage was over, that they were separated. Were they legally separated at the time he told you that? Another pause. Longer. I don't know what their legal status was. Did you ask? Bianca's jaw moved slightly. He told me it was over. I took him at his word. Of course, Rebecca said in a tone that was neither kind nor unkind. Miss Foley, you're wearing a necklace today. Can you describe it for the court? Bianca's hand went to her throat. The gesture was involuntary, the hand moving before the mind caught up with it. She pulled it back to her lap. It's a sapphire necklace. Where did you get it? Jonathan gave it to me? When? Approximately 8 months ago. Did he tell you where he got it? He said he bought it. Did you ask for documentation, a receipt, a certificate of authenticity? People don't usually ask for receipts when they receive gifts, Bianca said, and there was a flash of something in her voice, not quite defiance, but the ghost of it. People don't usually receive $400,000 sapphires as gifts, Rebecca replied. But point taken. She turned to the clerk. Your Honor, I'd like to direct Ms. Foley's attention to Exhibit 6, the original gemological certification for the Brooke family sapphire filed with their homeowner's insurance policy 3 years prior to the alleged theft. The document was produced. Rebecca set it before Bianca on the witness stand railing. Ms. Foley, can you read the description of the stone on that certificate? Bianca looked at the document. Ceylon sapphire, 20.3 carats, unheated platinum setting, original purchase, circa 1962. She stopped. Please continue. Bianca set the document down. Appraised value, $420,000. Does that match the necklace you're wearing? Silence. Ms. Foley, does the description on that certificate match the necklace you're wearing today? It's similar. Similar, Rebecca said. She let the words sit there. Ms. Foley, approximately 11 days ago, did you have a conversation with a man you knew as Daniel Harwick? Bianca's composure broke. Not completely, not the way it would later, but a fracture appeared visible and sudden like the first crack in ice under weight. Her eyes moved sharply to the gallery, and Catherine knew she was looking for Oliver Trent, and Catherine knew the moment Bianca found him, because Bianca went completely still, the way people go still when a memory and a reality collide, and neither one is what they thought. "Ah, yes," Bianca said. Her voice had changed, thinner now. "I spoke to Daniel." "And during that conversation, did you describe a request made by Jonathan Brooke regarding this necklace?" Falk stood. "Objection, Your Honor. Leading." "Sustained. Rephrase." "During that conversation," Rebecca said, "what did you tell Daniel Harwick about Jonathan Brooke's instructions to you regarding the necklace?" Bianca looked at her hands. She was quiet for long enough that Judge Peterson said, "Ms. Foley, you're required to answer." Bianca looked up. She looked at the judge with the expression of a woman who has run out of directions that feel safe. "He asked me to wear it today," she said. "He said it would help. He said if I was wearing it publicly as my own property, it would be harder for the court to—" She stopped. "To reclaim it as marital property. Yes." The gallery released a sound, not loud, but collective and genuine, the sound of 20 people understanding something simultaneously. Falk was on his feet again, objecting on grounds that were technically valid and practically meaningless, and Judge Peterson overruled him with the patience of a man who was past the point of pretending that objections could change what had already been said. Rebecca walked back to the plaintiff's table. She picked up a second folder. She returned to the witness stand with it. "Ms. Foley, I'm going to show you a series of text messages. These were obtained pursuant to a lawful subpoena of Mr. Brooks' phone records. Can you read the message highlighted on the first page?" Bianca took the folder with hands that were not steady. She opened it. She looked at the highlighted line. She said nothing. "Ms. Foley." Bianca read, "Wear the blue on Thursday. Make sure you walk in after 10. The more people who see it on you, the better." "That message was sent by Jonathan Brooke to you at 11:47 p.m. last Wednesday," Rebecca said. 3 days before this hearing. Is that his number?" "Yes," Bianca said. The word came out barely above a whisper. "And did you follow those instructions?" Bianca set the folder down on the railing. She looked at Catherine for the second time, and this time she didn't look away. She held it 2, 3, 4 seconds, and in those seconds Catherine saw something she hadn't expected to see. Not defiance, not the smug certainty of a woman who had walked in wearing victory around her neck. Something more complicated than that, something that looked uncomfortably like recognition. "Yes," Bianca said, "I followed his instructions." Rebecca nodded. "No further questions." Falk stood for cross. He approached Bianca with more care than he had approached Oliver, the care of a man handling something that might break in a direction he couldn't predict. "Ms. Foley," he said, "when Mr. Brooke gave you the necklace, did he tell you it had been stolen?" "No." "Did he indicate in any way that the necklace had been taken from his wife?" "No. He said he'd bought it." "And you had no reason to disbelieve him at that time?" "No." "So from your perspective, you received what you believed to be a legitimate gift from a man you were in a relationship with?" "Yes." Falk turned to the judge with the satisfaction of a man who had retrieved the only useful thread left in his case. Your Honor, the defense would submit that Ms. Foley's presence here today and her wearing of the item in question reflects not a coordinated scheme on her part, but rather the actions of a young woman who was herself misled by the defendant about the provenance of the jewelry. It was a good move. Catherine recognized it as a good move, the kind of legal judo that tries to use the weight of one liability to cancel another. If Bianca was a victim, she was less of a co-conspirator. And if she was less of a co-conspirator, the scheme looked smaller, more personal, less calculated. Rebecca stood before Falk had finished his sentence. Your Honor, if the defense is characterizing Ms. Foley as a victim of Mr. Brooks' deception, the plaintiff has no objection to that characterization. It does not alter the established facts regarding Mr. Brooks' own culpability. It does, however, she paused, the timing precise, raise an interesting question about what Miss Foley did 11 days ago when she began to suspect that the gift was not what she'd been told. Peterson looked at Bianca. Miss Foley, when you spoke to the individual you knew as Daniel Harwick 11 days ago, when you expressed concern about the necklace's origins, did you take any steps after that conversation to verify the necklace's provenance? Bianca looked at the judge with the expression of someone who knows the correct answer and the honest answer are not the same thing. No, she said. Did you contact the police? No. Did you contact an attorney? No. What did you do? Bianca's throat moved. I called Jonathan. He told me not to worry. He said he had everything under control. And you believed him. It wasn't a question, but Bianca answered it anyway. I wanted to, she said. And for the first time her voice cracked just slightly, just enough, and Catherine, watching her from across the room, felt something she absolutely had not expected to feel, something she would not have named out loud, not then, not in that room, but she felt it. It didn't change anything. It didn't soften what Bianca had done, the walking in, the wearing, the smiling. But it was there, the complicated human fact of a 28-year-old woman who had let herself believe a man who was very, very good at being believed. Catherine knew something about that. Peterson made a note. He looked at Falk. Does the defense have any additional witnesses or evidence to present? Falk looked at his notes. He looked at Jonathan. Jonathan was looking at the table. Falk said, No, Your Honor. Ms. Stiles. One final matter, Your Honor. The plaintiff requests that the court order Ms. Foley to surrender the necklace as evidence at this time given the established documentation of its provenance and its status as the subject of an active insurance fraud investigation. Peterson looked at Bianca. Ms. Foley, you've heard the request. Bianca sat in the witness chair for a moment that lasted much longer than its actual seconds. Her hand went to her throat again, this time slowly, deliberately, not the involuntary grab of earlier. Her fingers found the clasp at the back of her neck. The room watched. She undid the clasp. She held the necklace in her palm for a moment, the chain pooling between her fingers, the stone catching the light one last time, and Catherine watched the stone and thought about her grandmother, and thought about 12 years, and thought about sitting in a hospital room while a man she trusted was emptying her house, and she felt the feeling move through her like a current, electric and complete, and then it was gone and she was just Catherine Brooks sitting at a table in a courtroom, watching a 28-year-old woman surrender something that had never been hers. Bianca held the necklace out to the bailiff. The bailiff took it. Jonathan Brooke put his hand over his eyes. It was the first genuinely unguarded thing he had done all day, and the courtroom saw it. Every person in that room saw it, the hand going up, covering the eyes, the broad shoulders dropping a fraction of an inch. It lasted only a moment, then he pulled the hand away and straightened and reassembled himself. But the moment had existed. It was in the record now, in the way things that happen in a room full of witnesses are always in the record regardless of whether anyone writes them down. Rebecca leaned toward Catherine and said nothing. She just placed her hand briefly on top of Catherine's on the table. 1 second. Then she removed it and straightened her papers. Judge Peterson looked at the evidence tray. The necklace lay there now among the diamonds and the emeralds and the Cartier brooch, and the room was very quiet. I'm going to take a brief recess, Peterson said, before delivering preliminary findings and addressing the criminal referral question. He looked at both tables with the even attention of a man who has made up his mind and is taking time not because he needs it, but because the gravity of what comes next deserves the proper weight of preparation. We'll reconvene in 30 minutes. The gavel came down. The room broke open, sound and movement rushing back in like water through a dam. People in the gallery turned to each other. The court reporter gathered her transcripts. The bailiff moved the evidence tray to a secure position beside the clerk's table. Jonathan stood. He stood and he turned, and for the first time all day he looked directly at Catherine. She looked back. Neither of them said anything. There was nothing left that words could do. The financial records were in evidence. The text messages were in evidence. The necklace was in the bailiff's hands. Oliver Trent's testimony was in the transcript. Bianca Foley had answered every question under oath. Jonathan looked at Catherine for 3 seconds. Then he looked away. Rebecca watched this exchange and said nothing. She began organizing her files with the methodical precision of a woman completing a job she was very good at. Around them, the courtroom settled into the particular charged stillness of a recess that everyone in the room understood was not really a pause, but a preparation for an ending. Catherine looked at the evidence tray one more time. At the necklace. At the pendant her grandmother had worn on her wedding day, had worn to every important occasion of her long life, had pressed into Catherine's 8-year-old hands with the specific weight of something being passed on deliberately and with love. It was coming home, and Catherine Brooke, sitting in that courtroom with her hands folded over her notebook and her pen uncapped, and her sister's coffee still faintly warm in her memory. From 6 o'clock that morning felt something she had not felt in a very long time. Not triumph, not yet. Something quieter than that. Something that lived underneath triumph, the way roots live underneath a tree. The thing that makes the standing possible. She felt like herself. After everything that had been taken, after every calculated diminishment, every lie held gently over a breakfast table, every month of wondering whether she was wrong about what she knew was right. After all of it, she sat in that room and felt the specific solidity of a woman who had done what needed to be done and had done it without losing herself in the process. The bailiff stood by the door. The clock on the wall read 12 minutes past noon. 30 minutes, then Peterson would come back. And whatever happened in the next 30 minutes in the hallway where Jonathan and Falk were undoubtedly recalibrating in the way people recalibrate when they've already lost but haven't yet admitted it. In the witness corridor where Bianca Foley was sitting with whatever remained of the morning's certainty. In the quiet interior of Judge Peterson's chambers where a man with 30 years of experience was reading financial documents and forming conclusions. Whatever happened in those 30 minutes, Catherine understood that the story was no longer in doubt. It had stopped being in doubt the moment Oliver Trent sat in that chair. Maybe it had stopped being in doubt even before that. Maybe it had stopped the moment Bianca Foley walked through those doors wearing a dead woman's necklace because her grandmother was not dead, but the trust that necklace had represented was and had been for longer than Catherine had allowed herself to know. She opened her notebook to a fresh page. She wrote one word at the top, home. Then she capped her pen, folded her hands, and waited for the judge to come back. The 30 minutes felt like an hour and passed like 10 minutes. That was the strange compression of waiting when you already knew the shape of what was coming, but couldn't yet hold the weight of it. Rebecca used the recess to make 3 phone calls, each one short, each one conducted in the hallway outside the courtroom doors with her back to the gallery windows and her voice low. Catherine didn't ask who she was calling. She had learned over 7 months of working with Rebecca Stiles that the woman operated on multiple tracks simultaneously and that the tracks she didn't discuss were usually the ones that mattered most. Catherine sat at the plaintiff's table and did not look at Jonathan. She was aware of him, the way you're aware of weather not by looking at it directly, but by everything it does to the air around it. She could feel the quality of his stillness across the room. Earlier that morning, it had been the stillness of control of a man managing his presentation, with the discipline of someone who had been managing presentations his entire professional life. Now it was different. Now it was the stillness of a man who had run out of moves and was sitting very quietly inside that fact. Richard Falk came back in at 12:38. He sat down, opened his notepad, and wrote something that Catherine suspected was nothing, something to do with his hands. She recognized the impulse. Jonathan came in 2 minutes later. He had been in the men's room, she guessed, because there was a quality to the way he walked carefully, with the deliberate steadiness of a man who had splashed cold water on his face and was carrying the results of that back into a room that had already decided his fate. He sat. He straightened his tie. He put his hands on the table. He looked at Catherine. She met his eyes this time. She held them. She gave him nothing. No anger, no softness, no acknowledgement of the 12 years that lived between them like a country they had both lived in and could never fully leave. Just her eyes steady looking back. He looked away first. Rebecca came back in at 12:41, sat beside Catherine and said quietly, "The assistant district attorney's office called me back." Catherine turned to look at her. "And they've been monitoring the insurance fraud investigation independently for 4 months. Our forensic report and Oliver's testimony are consistent with what they've already built. They're prepared to move on formal charges." She paused. "Today." The word landed softly. "Today," Catherine repeated, "possibly before we leave this building." Catherine looked at the table. She thought about that for a moment, the specific shape of it, the mechanics of it, the fact that Jonathan Brooke might walk out of this courtroom and directly into something he could not negotiate or reroute or reframe. The thought was not satisfying in the way she might have expected. It was more like watching something inevitable arrive on schedule. "Does he know?" she asked. "Falk probably suspects. Jonathan—" Rebecca paused. "Jonathan tends to believe that things he doesn't acknowledge can't touch him. It's been one of his more expensive habits." The bailiff called the room to order. Judge Peterson returned at 12:44. He settled, adjusted his reading glasses, and looked out at the courtroom with the expression of a man who had spent the recess doing exactly what he said he would do, and was now prepared to say what he'd found. "I've reviewed the evidence entered this morning," he began, "along with the prior submissions in this dissolution proceeding. I want to address several matters in sequence, and I'd ask both counsel to hold objections until I've completed my preliminary findings, at which point I'll give each party an opportunity to respond." Falk nodded. Rebecca was already still. First, regarding the dissolution itself, given the evidence of fraudulent concealment of marital assets, specifically, the routing of insurance proceeds through the shell entities described in Exhibit 14. The court finds that a full forensic accounting of marital assets is warranted before any settlement figure can be determined. I'm appointing a court-approved financial examiner to conduct that accounting. Mr. Brooke, your cooperation with this process is not optional. Jonathan's hands pressed flat on the table. Second, regarding this personal property. The evidence establishes to the court's satisfaction that the items entered as Exhibit 15, including the Salon sapphire necklace, the diamond pieces, the emerald pieces, and the Cartier brooch, are the property of Catherine Brooke, having been taken from the marital home without her knowledge or consent and subsequently concealed. These items are to be returned to the plaintiff upon the conclusion of today's proceedings. Catherine felt something release in her chest. Not dramatic, not the clean catharsis of movies. More like the slow unwinding of a tension she had been carrying so long she had stopped noticing it was there. Third, Peterson continued, and here his voice changed slightly, not louder, but more deliberate, each word set down with the care of something being made permanent. The evidence presented today raises credible questions of criminal conduct, specifically insurance fraud in connection with the fraudulent claim filed following the alleged burglary grand larceny in connection with the taking and concealment of the plaintiff's personal property, and financial fraud in connection with the establishment of shell entities for the purpose of concealing marital assets. He paused. This court is referring these matters to the Cook County State's Attorney's Office for investigation and potential prosecution. Richard Falk stood. Your Honor, the defense would like to note for the record. Sit down, Mr. Falk. Falk sat. I'm not finished. Peterson looked at Jonathan Brooke directly, for the first time since the morning. Mr. Brooke, I want to be clear about something. This court refers matters for criminal investigation when the evidence warrants it. The evidence today warrants it. Whether charges are ultimately filed and what results from them is a matter for the state's attorney and, if necessary, a criminal court. What I can tell you is that the referral is being made today, that the evidence entered in this proceeding will accompany that referral, and that I would strongly advise you to have a conversation with your attorney that goes considerably beyond the scope of what was discussed in the hallway during the last recess. The gallery was absolutely silent, not the held-breath silence of anticipation, the different silence of aftermath, the stillness of a room in which something large has landed and everyone is still feeling the vibration. Jonathan Brooke was looking at the judge. His face was composed. His jaw was set. He looked, Catherine thought, like a man watching a verdict that he had intellectually prepared for, but had never genuinely believed would come. Like a man for whom consequences had always been something that happened to other people. She watched him absorb it. She watched the composure hold, and then she watched, in the space of about 4 seconds, something move behind his eyes that she could not name precisely, but recognized instinctively as the specific grief of a man understanding for the first time, and too late, the full cost of his own choices. Then it was gone, and the composure was back, and he leaned toward Falk and said something very quietly. Falk nodded. He wrote something on his legal pad. Rebecca beside Catherine exhaled through her nose. The slow, quiet exhale of a woman who had been carrying the weight of this case for 7 months and was beginning carefully to set it down. Peterson looked at both tables. Are there any additional matters counsel wishes to raise before I address the question of interim support and asset freeze orders? Yes, Your Honor. Rebecca stood. The plaintiff requests an immediate freeze on all accounts associated with the defendant, including but not limited to Meridian Holdings, LLC, and the associated entities described in Exhibit 14, pending the forensic accounting process. Granted, Peterson said before Falk could stand. Falk stood anyway. Your Honor, an asset freeze of that breadth would effectively prevent Mr. Brooke from conducting his legitimate business operations. Mr. Falk, your client, routed $380,000 through 3 shell companies and into an offshore account during the pendency of this proceeding. The court's patience with arguments about the inconvenience of financial oversight is limited this afternoon. Peterson looked at him with the even patience of a man who has made this decision and does not intend to revisit it. The freeze is granted. We'll set a review date in 30 days. Falk sat back down. He didn't look at Jonathan. He was looking at his notes, and Catherine could see from where she sat that he had stopped writing anything new. He was reading what was already there, reading it the way a person reads a document they wish said something different. And then the courtroom doors opened. Not with the theatrical timing of Bianca Foley's entrance that morning, quietly. 2 men in suits, not courtroom suits, not the expensive architectural suits of lawyers built for performance, but the quieter, purposeful suits of men who had come to do something specific. They spoke briefly to the bailiff. The bailiff crossed to Judge Peterson and bent close to his ear. Peterson listened. He nodded. He looked at the 2 men and then at the defendant's table. Mr. Falk, he said, you may wish to speak with your client immediately. Falk turned. He saw the 2 men. Catherine watched something pass across his face. Not surprise exactly, but the professional resignation of an attorney who had prepared for multiple outcomes and was now watching the worst one arrive on schedule. He turned to Jonathan. He put his hand on Jonathan's arm. He said something close and low, and Jonathan's head turned slowly toward the 2 men at the back of the room. Jonathan Brooke looked at them for a long moment. Then he looked back at the table. He looked at his hands. He looked at the legal pads, the coffee cup with the lid still slightly askew, the unremarkable debris of a morning spent losing what he had spent years believing was secured. He said to no one in particular, in a voice that Catherine heard clearly from across the room, I need a minute. One of the men at the back said quietly but audibly, Mr. Brooke, we can give you a few minutes with your attorney. I know what you're here for. Jonathan's voice was flat. Not defiant, just flat. The voice of a man on the other side of something. I just need a minute. They gave him the minute. Catherine watched him use it. He sat very still. He put one hand flat on the table and he looked at it, at his hand, at the table, at the space immediately in front of him. He breathed. And for 60 seconds, the courtroom gave him the strange courtesy of silence, the way witnesses at an accident sometimes go quiet, not from indifference, but from the involuntary recognition of a human moment they hadn't expected to feel anything about. Then Jonathan Brooks stood up. He straightened his jacket. He picked up nothing from the table. Not his phone, not his notepad, none of the careful professional props he had arranged at the start of the day. He left all of it there, and he turned and he walked toward the two men at the back of the room with the measured steps of a man who understood that the only dignity left to him was in how he moved through the next 60 seconds. He passed Catherine's table. He didn't look at her. She looked at him. She looked at the set of his jaw and the width of his shoulders and the silver at his temples that had arrived in the last 2 years of their marriage, and she thought about the man who had driven her to the emergency room at 3 a.m. when she thought she was having a heart attack, and it turned out to be anxiety, who had held her hand through it and brought her water and stayed until 4 a.m. and driven her home and made toast. She thought about him the way you think about weather that has already passed, not wishing it back, not mourning it exactly, just acknowledging that it had been real. Then he was past her table, and she turned back to the front, and she was Catherine Brooke, plaintiff, and it was 12:57 in the afternoon, and the man she had married 12 years ago was walking out of a courtroom in the custody of 2 men from the state's attorney's office, and the necklace her grandmother had clasped around her 8-year-old neck was sitting in an evidence tray 12 feet away, waiting to come home. Rebecca put her hand on Catherine's arm. "You okay?" "Yes," Catherine said. "Really?" She thought about it for a moment. The honest version. "I don't know what I am," she said, "but I'm okay." Rebecca nodded. "That's the right answer." The gallery had erupted in the controlled chaos of a courtroom after something significant. People standing, 2 reporters moving toward the doors, the clerk issuing sharp instructions about order and procedure, the bailiff directing the 2 remaining spectators to remain seated. Falk had his phone out and was already calling someone, his voice low and rapid, the voice of an attorney activating a contingency plan. Bianca Foley was still in the gallery. Catherine hadn't forgotten her. She had been aware of her the whole time, the way you're aware of something in your peripheral vision, present unresolved, waiting for attention. Now she turned and looked at her directly for the second time that day. Bianca was sitting very still. She was not crying. She was not on her phone. She was sitting with her hands in her lap and her eyes on the middle distance, and she had the quality of a person who is doing the hard internal work of recalibrating not just the facts of a situation, but the story they had been telling themselves about those facts. Her hand went to her throat, to the absence there, where the necklace had been for 8 months and was not anymore. Catherine looked at her for a long moment. Then she looked away. Not in anger, not in the cold satisfaction she might have expected to feel, just looked away. The way you look away from something that no longer requires your attention because the account between you has been settled by forces larger than either of you. "Your Honor," Rebecca said, turning back to the bench, "the plaintiff requests that the court formalize the return of the personal property and confirm the terms of the interim support order before we adjourn." "Agreed," Peterson said. He looked at Falk. "Mr. Falk, in your client's absence, are you able to confirm that the defense will not contest the interim orders?" Falk lowered his phone. He looked at the judge with the expression of a man choosing carefully which battles still existed worth fighting. "The defense does not contest the interim orders, Your Honor." "Very well." Peterson looked at the clerk. "Let's formalize the property return." He looked at Catherine for the first time since the morning. Not as a party in a proceeding, something slightly more direct than that. The look of a man acknowledging a human being who had done something difficult, and done it with the kind of composure that doesn't go unnoticed by a judge who has watched a great many people sit in a great many courtrooms. He said nothing beyond what the proceeding required, but he held her eyes for a moment before looking back at his papers. The clerk carried the evidence tray to the plaintiff's table. She set it down. She looked at Rebecca, who nodded. The clerk stepped back. Rebecca said to Catherine, "Go ahead." Catherine looked at the tray, at the diamonds and the emeralds, at the Cartier brooch with its small, perfect craftsmanship, and at the pendant lying there on its square of white cloth, the stone catching the flat fluorescent light and doing something extraordinary with it, pulling it in and returning it richer, deeper, the way the best things do. She reached out. She picked it up. It was lighter than she remembered, or maybe she was stronger than she had been the last time she held it. She closed her fingers around it, the platinum cool against her palm, the stone smooth under her thumb, and she held it there, not raising it, not displaying it, just holding it, her hand closed around it in the simple private fact of having it back. She did not cry. She had decided she would not cry in this room. She kept that decision. But her breath, when she let it out, came out long and slow and complete, in a way that breathing had not been for 8 months, maybe longer, maybe for longer than she had let herself notice. "Ms. Brooke," Rebecca said quietly, "we still have a few procedural matters to get through." "I know," Catherine said. She opened her hand. She looked at the necklace one more time. Then she set it carefully back on the cloth, straightened, and picked up her pen. "I'm ready," she said. And she was. The procedural matters took another 40 minutes. Asset freeze confirmed. Financial examiner appointed. Interim support figures set. Court dates established for the full dissolution hearing pending the forensic accounting. Each item addressed in the careful sequential language of the law, each one a brick in a structure that would take months more to complete, but whose foundation had been laid this morning solidly and permanently in the first hour of Oliver Trent's testimony. Falk handled the remainder of the session with the professional competence of a man whose client was no longer in the room, but whose obligations continued. He raised 2 objections, both of which were denied. He noted 3 items for the record. He did his job. Catherine had no feeling about him one way or another. He was an instrument of a process she had already survived. At 2:14 in the afternoon, Judge Peterson looked up from his final notes and said, "We're adjourned. Counsel, I'll expect submissions regarding the forensic accounting timeline by the 28th. The gavel came down. Catherine sat for a moment after it did. She sat and she let the room move around her, the filing of papers, the conversation starting up, the sound of chairs and footsteps, and the particular energy of a proceeding that has concluded, and she held very still inside all of it. Rebecca was already organizing her briefcase. She looked at Catherine sideways. "You know this isn't entirely over. I know. The full divorce proceeding, the criminal case, those are months, maybe more. I know that too. But today..." Rebecca paused. She closed her briefcase. She looked at Catherine with the expression of a woman who is rarely at a loss for language and has for once decided that less is more. "Today was a good day," she said. Catherine looked down at the necklace on the evidence cloth. "Yes," she said. "It was." She picked up her pen. She picked up her notebook. She closed it over the words she had written throughout the day, "absolutely window home," and she held it against her chest, the way you hold something that has witnessed something with you, something private and significant. And she stood up from the plaintiff's table for the last time that day. Carol was waiting in the hallway. She had come at some point during the recess and waited. Catherine hadn't known, hadn't been told, but she was not surprised. Carol was the kind of person who showed up. She had always been the kind of person who showed up. She looked at Catherine's face when Catherine came through the doors. She didn't ask anything. She read whatever was written there, not victory exactly, not relief exactly, but the specific quieter thing that lives underneath both of those, and she opened her arms. Catherine walked into them. They stood there in the hallway of the Cook County Family Court for a long moment, the two of them, while people moved around them and the machinery of the law continued its procedural business on the other side of the doors, and Catherine held on to her sister and felt the day settle around her like something finally set down after being carried very far. "It's done," Carol asked into her hair. "The first part," Catherine said. Carol pulled back and looked at her. "But the necklace. Coming home with us." Carol's face did something complicated and then settled. "Good," she said. "Good." They stood together in the hallway while the late afternoon light of a Chicago February came through the tall windows, pale cold, indifferent to human proceedings, and Catherine Brooke held her notebook against her chest and thought about nothing in particular. Just this. Just the hallway and her sister and the specific sensation of standing on solid ground after a very long time of not being sure the ground was there. Behind the doors somewhere in the procedural remainder of the afternoon, the evidence tray with the necklace was being formally processed for return to its owner. And in another part of the building, or possibly already in a vehicle headed somewhere more permanent, Jonathan Brooke was having the most important conversation of his life with people who had not come to negotiate. Catherine did not think about him. She looked at her sister. She said, "Can we get coffee somewhere? Real coffee, not the stuff from the machine." Carol laughed short, surprised, genuine. The laugh of someone who needed to laugh and is grateful for the permission. "Yes," she said. "Absolutely yes." They walked toward the elevator together. Around them, the building continued its business, the clerks, the attorneys, the ordinary daily machinery of a courthouse on a Thursday in February, none of it aware of the specific weight of what had happened in Courtroom 7 that morning. None of it required to be. It was enough that they were. The coffee shop was 3 blocks from the courthouse, the kind of place that had been on the same corner for 20 years and smelled like roasted beans and radiator heat and the specific comfort of something that had survived by being genuinely good at one thing. Carol ordered for both of them without asking. She knew what Catherine drank. She had known for 40 years. They sat at a table by the window, and Catherine wrapped both hands around the cup and let the heat move through her palms and up her wrists. And she didn't say anything for a long moment, and Carol didn't make her. That was the thing about a sister who had known you your whole life. She understood the difference between silence that needed filling and silence that needed witnessing. "The necklace gets formally released tomorrow morning," Catherine said finally. "Rebecca has to sign some additional paperwork. Then it comes to me directly. Not today. Evidence processing. There's a protocol." She paused. "I've waited 8 months. I can wait one more day." Carol watched her. "How do you feel?" Catherine considered the question honestly, the way she hadn't been able to consider much honestly for the last 8 months, because honest consideration had required energy she'd been spending on survival. "Like I just put down something very heavy," she said, "and my arms still feel the shape of it, even though it's gone." Carol nodded. She understood that too. "He looked at me," Catherine said, "when he walked past the table. On his way out." "What did you do?" "I looked back." "Good," Carol said simply. Catherine drank her coffee. Outside, the February afternoon was doing what February afternoons in Chicago do, pressing down on everything with a gray, indifferent weight that somehow made the warmth inside feel more specifically real. She watched people move past the window, coats and scarves, people going somewhere, people coming from somewhere. The ordinary urgent business of lives that had nothing to do with courtrooms or stolen necklaces or 12 years of marriage dissolving in a room that smelled of stale wax and institutional coffee. Her phone buzzed. She looked at it. "Rebecca," she answered. "Hey." "How are you doing?" Rebecca asked. "Carol's making me drink coffee." "Good. Listen, I just got off the phone with the assistant DA's office. They've confirmed the arrest. Jonathan was processed about 40 minutes ago. He's been charged with insurance fraud, grand larceny, and fraudulent concealment of assets. There may be additional charges pending the full forensic accounting." Catherine set her cup down. "Okay. I wanted you to hear it from me before it hits the news. And it will hit the news, Catherine. Jonathan Brooke being arrested is not a small story in this city." "I know. Are you prepared for that?" She thought about it, about what it would mean, the calls, the articles, the people who had been at their dinner parties and charity events and business functions who would read the headlines and form their conclusions, about the particular exposure of having your private catastrophe become a matter of public record. "I'm as prepared as I can be," she said. "I'm not going to hide from it." "I didn't think you would," Rebecca said. "I'll call you in the morning about the property release. Try to get some sleep." Catherine hung up. She looked at Carol. "He's been charged." Carol's expression moved through several things quickly, then settled. "Good," she said for the second time that afternoon. And in Carol's voice that single word carried the weight of a woman who had watched her sister cry at 3 a.m. and had driven across the city more than once, and had sat at kitchen tables and held hands and said nothing because there was nothing useful to say, and was now saying the only word that fit what had finally happened. Catherine picked up her coffee cup. She held it. She looked at the window, and she thought about Jonathan Brooke in a processing room somewhere in this city, and she felt nothing vindictive. That surprised her again the way it had surprised her earlier in the courtroom. She had expected vindication to feel sharper. She had expected it to have edges. Instead, it was just real. The way justice is real when it arrives. Not thrilling, not theatrical. Just the solid, quiet fact of the world correcting itself. She thought about the morning he had texted her at the hospital. "Is your mom okay? You going tonight? Thinking of you both." She thought about sitting in that waiting room, her mother's hand in hers, reading that text, and feeling briefly weakly grateful that he had checked in, while he was presumably already in motion, already executing the thing he had planned. She had been so trusting. That was what she kept returning to. Not with self-blame, she had worked very hard with a therapist over the last 7 months to dismantle the architecture of self-blame, but with a kind of clear-eyed recognition. She had trusted him the way you trust the ground. Not consciously, not with gratitude, but as a baseline assumption underneath everything else. The ground is there. Jonathan is honest. The sun rises in the east. She had been wrong about one of those things. "Mom called this morning," Carol said. Catherine looked up. "I know. I didn't answer. I didn't want to talk before. She wants to know. I'll call her tonight." She paused. "The necklace Mom doesn't know it was taken. I never told her the whole story. I told her it was in a safe deposit box while things were being sorted out." Carol's expression was careful. "You're going to have to tell her." "I know, I will." Catherine looked at her hands. "I just need to find the right way." "There isn't a right way. There's just telling her." "I know that too." She looked at her sister. "You're very good at saying true things that don't help." Carol smiled. It was the smile of a woman who had grown up with Catherine and knew exactly what that meant and accepted it as the affection it was. "It's my gift." They sat for another 20 minutes. Then Carol drove her back to the house, and Catherine sat in the passenger seat and watched the city go by, the neighborhoods she had driven through 1,000 times, the corners and storefronts and turns that constituted the physical geography of her life. And she felt the day settling around her in layers, not neatly, not the way endings settle in stories, more organically than that, more honestly, the way real things settle unevenly, with loose ends still visible with the understanding that tomorrow would require its own set of things from her. She slept that night better than she had in 8 months, not well, but better. Her body seemed to have decided that it was permitted to rest now that whatever vigil it had been keeping could be suspended at least for a night. She woke twice, once at 2, once at 4, and lay in the dark of Carol's guest room, listening to the radiator and thinking about nothing specific. Just existing in the dark and letting the thoughts move through without grabbing at them. She was getting better at that. At 7:15 the next morning, her phone showed 3 missed calls from numbers she didn't recognize and 4 text messages from people she did. 2 journalists, a woman from her old book club who had apparently seen something online, and a text from her friend Diane, who had been her closest friend throughout the marriage and had stayed that way after that, said only "I heard." "I'm proud of you. Call me when you're ready." She called her mother first. Her mother was 81 and sharp, and had the particular clarity of women who have survived enough to stop being surprised by human behavior. Catherine told her everything. She didn't dress it up. She said the necklace was taken. Jonathan took it. It was part of something larger and uglier than a burglary. The court found in my favor yesterday. The necklace is coming home today. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then her mother said, "The necklace was always yours. That never changed." "I know, Mom. And you're all right. I'm all right." Another silence. Then quietly, "Your grandmother wore that to her sister's wedding in 1958. Did I ever tell you that her sister was getting married and she didn't have anything beautiful enough to wear, and your grandmother drove 3 hours to bring it to her, just for the day, just so her sister could feel like herself on her wedding day?" A pause. "That necklace has always gone where it needed to go." Catherine pressed her fingers over her eyes. She did not cry. She was getting very practiced at not crying, though she understood from her therapist that this was both a strength and a thing to watch. "I'll bring it to see you as soon as I can," she said. "I know you will," her mother said. "I'll make tea." Rebecca called at 9:30. The paperwork was complete. The property was ready for release. Did Catherine want to come to the clerk's office directly, or did she want Rebecca to receive it on her behalf? "I'll come," Catherine said. She dressed. She drove herself. This time Carol had offered to come, and Catherine had said no, gently and clearly, because there were some things you needed to do alone. Not because they required isolation, but because they required the specific presence of yourself without buffer or witness. The clerk's office was on the second floor of the courthouse, a different wing from the courtroom where yesterday had happened. A woman Catherine had never seen before handed her a receipt to sign. She signed it. The woman disappeared into a back room and came back with a bag, not the velvet bag from the evidence tray. A standard brown paper evidence bag, sealed with tape, her name written on the front in black marker. Ordinary, procedural. The way important things are often packaged by systems that have no particular feeling about them. Catherine signed the release form. She took the bag. She sat down in a chair against the wall of the waiting area. There were 3 other people there, all waiting for their own paperwork, their own resolutions, all absorbed in their own orbits. And she opened the bag. She reached in. She found the pendant first. Her fingers recognized it before her eyes confirmed it. The weight of it, the specific temperature of the platinum, the smooth face of the stone. She drew it out. She held it in her palm in the ordinary light of a government waiting room and looked at it. 20 carats, salon, unheated, which meant the color was entirely its own, not enhanced, not altered, not made into something. It wasn't by the application of external heat. Just what it was fully from the beginning. The particular deep blue of deep water. The color her grandmother had called the color of a sky that hasn't decided yet whether it's day or night. She closed her fingers around it. She sat with it for a moment in the plastic chair in the waiting room with the fluorescent light and the other people and their ordinary paperwork, and she let the fact of it, the simple physical fact of it, move through her. Then she put it in her coat pocket, close to her chest, and she stood up. She was almost to the elevator when she heard her name. She turned. Bianca Foley was standing near the water fountain at the end of the hallway. She was dressed differently from yesterday, quieter, less deliberate. No jewelry at all, Catherine noticed. She had the look of someone who had slept badly and knew it showed and had decided not to fight it. She looked younger than she had in the courtroom. She looked, Catherine thought, her actual age. She was alone. They looked at each other across 20 feet of institutional corridor. Catherine did not move toward her. She didn't move away. Bianca walked toward her. She stopped a few feet away. She looked at Catherine with the expression of someone who has rehearsed what they want to say and has just understood that the rehearsed version is wrong. "I didn't know," Bianca said. "In the beginning. I want you to know that." Catherine looked at her. "I know you didn't. Not in the beginning." Bianca's jaw moved. "I should have asked more questions." "Yes," Catherine said. "You should have." "He was very—" Bianca stopped, started again. "He was very convincing." "I know exactly how convincing he was," Catherine said. "I was married to him for 12 years. Bianca looked at her. The look of someone receiving information they already had but hadn't yet let fully land. "I'm sorry," she said. "I know that's—" She stopped. "I know it probably doesn't help." Catherine considered her for a moment. The 28-year-old woman who had walked into that courtroom yesterday like she was arriving at her own coronation and was standing here today in a hallway outside the clerk's office, looking like someone who had aged 5 years overnight. Catherine thought about the hand pressed to the sapphire, the instinctive protective gesture of a woman holding on to something she sensed was leaving. "It doesn't fix anything," Catherine said. "But I hear you." Bianca nodded. She looked like she wanted to say more, and had decided correctly that more was not what this moment called for. "Are you going to be all right?" Catherine asked. She didn't plan to ask it. It came out of her from a place she hadn't quite consciously accessed, the same place the complicated feeling had come from in the courtroom when Bianca said, "I wanted to." The human reflex that refuses to be entirely switched off even when it would be more convenient. Bianca looked surprised, as if the question was the last thing she had expected. "I have a lawyer," she said. "That's not what I asked." Bianca held very still for a moment. Then, "I don't know yet." "That's an honest answer," Catherine said. She turned and pressed the elevator button. The doors opened. She stepped in. She looked back at Bianca Foley standing in the hallway with her hands at her sides and her neck bare and her face carrying the specific expression of someone standing at the beginning of a very long accounting. And Catherine held her eyes for one moment, not warmly, not coldly, just steadily, and then the doors closed. She rode the elevator down alone. Outside the building, the February air hit her sharp, direct, honest in the way February always is in Chicago, the way it cuts through pretense and gets to the actual temperature of things. She stood on the courthouse steps and she breathed it in. She put her hand in her coat pocket. She felt the pendant there, the weight of it against her palm, the cool of the platinum, the smooth face of the stone. She held it without taking it out, just held it. 3 weeks later, she drove to her mother's apartment on the North Shore. She brought the necklace in the same coat pocket she had carried it in every day since the clerk's office close to her chest. Her mother opened the door before she knocked. She had always had that timing, some maternal radar that announced arrivals before they happened, and she looked at Catherine's face and then at Catherine's coat pocket and she said, "Come in, tea's ready." They sat at the kitchen table. Her mother made the tea the way she always had pot on the table, 2 cups milk in a small pitcher, the same china she had used since Catherine was a child. The ordinary, reliable ritual of a woman who understood that comfort lived in consistency. Catherine reached into her pocket. She set the necklace on the table between them. Her mother looked at it for a long time without touching it. Then she reached out with her right hand, the hand that shook slightly now, the hand that had held 1,000 things over 81 years, and she touched the stone with the tip of one finger, gently, the way you touch something you thought you'd lost. "There she is," her mother said quietly. Catherine pressed her lips together. She held it. Her mother looked up at her. "You did a very hard thing, Katie. I had help." "You always had help. You also always had what it takes to use the help." Her mother picked up the necklace. She held it in both hands, the chain looping between her fingers. "You know what your grandmother used to say about this? That it was the color of a sky that hasn't decided yet." Her mother smiled. "She also said that anything worth keeping is worth fighting for. Not fighting as in being angry. Fighting as in showing up every day until the thing is resolved." She set the necklace down. She looked at Catherine. "You showed up every day." Catherine looked at the necklace on the table between them, at the stone catching the morning light from the kitchen window and doing what it always did, pulling it in, returning it different, deeper, richer than it arrived. She thought about this courtroom, about Rebecca's hand on her arm and the steady sound of Oliver Trent's voice, and the moment Bianca Foley reached behind her neck and undid the clasp. She thought about Jonathan's hand going over his eyes, about the 2 men in the quiet suits and the procedural language of a charge being read. She thought about the plastic chair in the clerk's office and her fingers finding the pendant before her eyes did. She thought about 12 years, about what they had contained, the real things, the good things, the mornings and the ordinary days, and the specific texture of a life lived alongside another person, all of it threaded through now with the knowledge of what had been running underneath it. She thought about the hospital room and her mother's hand and Jonathan's text and the empty jewelry box and the 8 months that had followed. She thought about what Rebecca had said on the courthouse steps the morning all of this began. "Tell me everything and don't protect him while you do it." She had done that. It had been the hardest and most important thing she had done in years. "I'm going to be all right, Mom," she said. Her mother looked at her with the specific attention of a woman who has raised a child and watched her become a person and has earned the right to know the difference between what is said and what is true. She looked at Catherine for a long moment. "I know you are," she said. "You've been all right for a long time. You just couldn't see it from where you were standing." Catherine picked up her tea. She drank it. It was exactly the right temperature, the way her mother's tea always was, not a coincidence, but a skill, the accumulated expertise of 10,000 cups made for people who needed them. Outside the window, February was still doing what February does. But Catherine had stopped needing the season to be different. She had stopped needing the light to be warmer, or the air to be softer, or the circumstances to be easier. She was sitting at her mother's kitchen table with her hands around a cup of tea and her grandmother's necklace on the table between them, and she was exactly who she was and exactly where she needed to be. That was enough, more than enough. It was she understood now what winning actually felt like. Not the sharp, electric moment of the verdict, not the clean, cinematic satisfaction of watching the guilty party escorted out of the room, but this, the kitchen table, the right temperature tea, the necklace catching morning light, her mother's voice saying her name the way it had said her name for 42 years, with the specific weight of someone who had always known exactly who she was, even when she had temporarily forgotten. Catherine Brooke had walked into that courtroom with her hands folded over a leather notebook and her grandmother's necklace on another woman's neck, and 12 years of stolen trust coiled in her chest like something waiting to be discharged. She had sat still when she wanted to stand. She had held her voice when she wanted to use it. She had trusted the process and the evidence and the woman beside her who had said, "Tell me everything." And she had walked out with everything that was hers, not just the necklace. Not just the legal victory, the frozen accounts, the criminal referral, the forensic accounting that would spend the next several months untangling what Jonathan had built and what it had cost. Not just the documented proof that she had been right about what she knew was true. She had walked out with herself, intact, clear-eyed, undiminished. The self that had existed before the marriage and had survived inside it, and had emerged from the wreckage of it, not smaller but more precisely defined, the way certain things are clarified by pressure, the way a stone becomes what it is through the long patience of time and force. The necklace on the table between her and her mother caught the light and held it, and gave it back. And Catherine Brooke picked up. Her tea looked at her mother across the table, and felt solidly, completely without qualification that she had come home.